Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Belloni. I'm the director of the International Queer and Migrant Film Festival Amsterdam. And it's a pleasure to welcome you at the opening day of the festival, which is the annual Amsterdam-based film festival for queer and migrant film. The festival this year will take place in a hybrid form, so with on-site screenings in cinemas and performances as well, and online screenings and talks. And today is the very first day of the festival as well, the first online talk in a series of 4, which will happen from today until Sunday onwards. And in today's talk, we will address homonationalism in the European perspective, and we will zoom in on how homonationalism is used as an instrument for exclusion and homophobia. Therefore, we invited several guests, and I will introduce the guests to you briefly. Filmmaker Hakim Atoui from Paris and sociologist Dino Suhonic from Amsterdam will reflect on homonationalism in Western Europe by analyzing the film La Première Marche, which was the opening film today in our festival. And the third guest of today is Amnesty International Hungary director David Vik, and he will reflect on the current situation in Hungary and whether the EU influences or dictates human rights issues. So this is the first day we are conducting these talks through StreamYard. It's a new platform for us. So hopefully everything will work out well. Through Facebook and through YouTube, you're following the debate, and you can actually leave comments and questions, which will be addressed in the final 15 minutes of this talk. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Dino Suhonic, and please, Dino, introduce yourself briefly.
Yes. Yeah, as you said, I'm Dino Suhonic. I'm the director of Maro Foundation, which is a queer Muslim foundation in the Netherlands. We call ourselves also International Platform for Queer Muslims. And we exist more than 8 years, and both within my work for Maruf and in my academic research, I'm pretty much almost obsessed with this subject.
Thank you, Dino. And then Hakim, you're a filmmaker, and you're actually debuted with this film. It's your first film, and it was immediately the opening film of our festival. So congratulations, and thank you so much for allowing us to screening the film. Could you say a few words about yourself and about your film? Just a brief introduction, please.
Sure. So my name is Hakim. I'm from Paris right now, and I'm really happy to be chatting with you tonight. Yes, La Première Marche is my first documentary. I guess I'll have time later to tell you how I more or less randomly ran into these 20-year-old activists who wanted to start the first ever Pride in the French suburbs. And I loved the idea right away, and I thought it would be a shame not to follow them and try to understand who they are and what they are fighting for, and why it is different, why their fight is different from the Parisian Pride, for instance. So that was the goal of the documentary.
Thank you, Hakim. And then David, a short word of introduction, please.
Hi, I'm also very happy that I can be here, and congratulations to Hakim, to his wonderful film, and also Dino, your amazing work. And I'm very glad that we're having this conversation. It's really a privilege to be with you. Today I'm the director of Amnesty International in Hungary, working on different fields of human rights. But before that, I was actually with Budapest Pride. That's an LGBTQ organization in Hungary. So I'm a member of the community and also involved in the work of the community as an activist very well. So I'm very happy to give an Eastern European tone or aspect for this conversation.
Thank you all for the introductions to yourself. So IQMF is a festival in Amsterdam, and apart from screening films, we always organize panel talks about films, but also about subjects related to the films. And normally we try to bring together a panel with people with different perspectives. So In this case, we wanted to bring Hakim with, obviously, he's the filmmaker from a more artistic approach, Dino Suhonic with the academic approach, and David with the perspective from the human rights approach, actually. And obviously, we realized that not everyone who's attending this conversation at the moment has seen the film, so we would like to give you a brief introduction to the film by showing the trailer.
Du coup, l'idée, c'est de faire une marche des fiertés.
Le but, c'est de faire vraiment une marche revendicative et politique.
La thématique de l'intersectionnalité, c'est quand on cumule des discriminations et qu'on se retrouve piégé dans une espèce de sac de nœuds social qui fait qu'on arrive à se représenter nulle part.
C'est ça. Ça donne, c'est chaud.
Il me demande si c'est pas trop dangereux à Saint-Denis dans le Quito.
Quand on est homosexuel en banlieue populaire, on est aussi victime des stigmates de la banlieue.
Ah bah tiens, t'es canon toi avec tes petits cheveux bouclés et ta petite peau caramel.
Et je pense qu'il faut parler, en fait, il faut détruire les tabous autour de la sexualité.
Ce que je veux dire, c'est que ça s'encule aussi dans le 93. Voilà.
Il faut aussi avoir une stratégie médiatique, c'est ça le truc.
Bah tu vois, on tombe sur des homophobes partout.
Nous fêtons un anniversaire, 50 ans de lutte pour nos droits. Nous portons le flambeau des émeutes de Stonewall.
Regarde-moi ça, je vois le palazzo. En 58 ans, je n'ai jamais vu une marche d'une telle ampleur.
Vous êtes tous genre dyslexiques dans cet assaut? Ça se passe comment en fait? Public, ça s'écrit avec QE et voir, ça s'écrit avec un E. Vous avez fait vos CP dans des stations-service?
Wow. So Hakim, congratulations with the film. It's a remarkable achievement, I think, for someone who made his first film. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
What we actually saw is Sorry?
No, I was saying, to be honest, we were two of us. I have a co-director on the movie.
Okay, yeah. Who couldn't be here for the talk today?
No, he couldn't. He's filming something else because we shot last year and we spent basically the last few months and weeks trying to show the movie in many places. So now he needed to go back to work at some point.
Yeah. So how did it go after the premiere of the film? Were you able to showcase the film in France in real life in cinemas?
Well, what happened is that actually when we did the movie, we had no budget, nothing at all. So we just shot it. We edited the movie, and we had no idea where to show it actually and how to show it. So we sent it to a French LGBTQ festival last year, and it got selected there. So we showed, which was some sort of work in process edit, and then a distributor came to us and said, well, we believe in it and we think it should go to cinemas next year. So at first it was supposed to come out this past June 2020, at the same time as the second Pride that these students were organizing for the second year in a row. But then obviously COVID happened, so it got postponed to October. And we're fortunate enough to have cinemas opened again in France for a few weeks. So our movie came out and was in cinemas for 10 days before it closed again.
So we're really lucky to be able to screen the film here in Amsterdam. So thank you again for it. Could you reflect a bit on the film itself? So you follow the initiative of 4 students who are organizing an alternative Pride parade in Paris.
Exactly.
Please elaborate on it.
Saint-Denis is actually really paradoxical because it's so close to Paris. It's really next door, and at the same time, in terms of population and money invested in that city, in that area, it's a disaster. And so we ran into these students whose idea was to say, we are not like the people who live in Paris. We don't have the same daily life. We don't have the same amount of money, we don't have the same experience, we don't have the same ethnical background. So our experience as gay, as lesbian, as transgender people from these suburbs is not the same as the Parisian one. So actually we cannot take the train 20 minutes, go to Paris and be proud there. It doesn't really make sense. We need to be proud in our own streets, and it had never been done before. So this is why they thought that their struggle was different from the others, because there's actually the basis of their fight is the concept of intersectionality. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I was not really familiar with this concept before meeting them. So it's basically being at the intersection of different stigma and discrimination. So for them, they are both seen as migrants and seen as LGBTQ people. And so they're discriminated in these two ways. And so that's why for them, their daily struggle is not the same as the struggle of a white Parisian LGBTQ person. And so since the struggle is different, then the fight itself is different, and what they ask for is different.
Yeah.
And to connect to the subject of today, homo nationalism, what happens is that they feel that there's one particular political party in France that is the far right, that is called Rassemblement National, and basically on a daily basis they don't really care about the LGBTQ question. They only care about it, or at least they pretend to care about it, when it's to target the Muslim community and to say, hey guys, if you are gay, if you're a lesbian, if you're transgender, if you're queer, well, there's someone who doesn't really like you, and there's someone who might be dangerous for you, and that person is the migrant next door. So join us in fighting them out. And for the people that we followed in our documentary, it's unbearable, because they want people to be together and not people to be against each other. And they know that they are just being used, actually, that their queerness is being used for political reasons, and that deep down, these politicians don't actually care about them and their struggle. For instance, most of the people from the far right, or I would say even 100%, voted against same-sex marriage in France 7 years ago. And now they are pretending to defend the LGBTQ question when it comes to actually fighting migrants.
Thank you. Dino, Hakim touched upon the issue of intersectionality and also about right-wing or far right-wing political parties hijacking the struggles of queer people in order to actually use or abuse their struggles for their own political gains. You did quite some research in the Netherlands on homo nationalism. Do you recognize this dynamics, actually, what was described by Hakim?
Oh, definitely. I mean, in the literature, you can even call Netherlands as the beacon of homo nationalism. The rhetoric that is being used in France, in Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, UK, US, started actually pretty much in the Netherlands. And most of the research or most of the analysis go back to, for example, the killing of Theo van Gogh, the film director, 9/11, or the post-1989 multicultural debates. But we can even trace back the homo nationalism or homo nationalist rhetorics back to 1979, after the Iranian Revolution, when suddenly there was a rise in news articles covering the anti-gay violence in post-revolution Iran, which was interesting to see, because simultaneously in the Netherlands, a lot of people were still struggling with the idea of gay emancipation. That was in the midst of AIDS crisis as well. there was so much stigma going on, a lot of social unrest, resistance from the homophobic parts of the society, which made it even more confusing that there was suddenly such a focus on not only Iran but other Muslim countries as well. Why at the same time we don't have the capacity to analyze our own situation. And I think that's the soundtrack of nowadays as well, and that's the I think one of the core messages of homo-nationalist theorizing is that you ignore the homophobia at home while projecting it on the people living outside of the country, or indeed people with migrant backgrounds. And I have to say, I've pretty much focused more on how Muslims are being labeled, and my research was about the framing of Muslim politicians based on these homo-nationalist discourses. So I was looking at how Muslim politicians could never gain complete political development because they are Muslim. That's why they are homophobic. That's why they don't belong to us. So that's in the Netherlands. I think it's an interesting case. I also love the French case in the sense like it's an interesting case. But in the French case, I think more than in the Dutch case, you can see that the secularism or discussions on secularism also play a role. And I love the part of the movie. I hope I'm allowed to say that, but that in a radio interview with that white, I don't know if he was gay, but white French man who was also giving some answers. And he said, not Islam in particular, but all religions are problematic. So I think that part is often ignored because homo-nationalism has also to do a lot with nationalism itself. But in French case and in certain also in the Dutch case, our relationship with religion also plays a role. But there's a difference when fundamentalists from the, let's say, Christian or Jewish circles are not accepting gays. There is a different treatment. You treat them like they're still part of us. But when it comes to people with migrant background, we do still think that this is yet another reason why they don't belong in this country.
Thank you for presenting the case in the Netherlands, Dino. So David, does it sound familiar for you, the cases which were presented by Hakim and Dino? Is it the same in Hungary, or is it different?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question as you pose it, and thank you for your insights, Dino and Hakim. Both were very, very exciting. It's relevant to the Hungarian experience to a sense that there is, in fact, a government narrative against non-white parts of the population, or even Muslims or migrants in or around Hungary that is homophobic. That is racist and xenophobic, but it is not really there for the purpose to gain the support of voters who would stand up for LGBTQ rights, and the pattern is not really with regards to the queer community actually, but the argument that leading politicians in Hungary have been making recently is around the far right and the governing majority in Hungary, which is a conservative right-wing party and majority, protecting the rights of the Jewish population against Muslims who would otherwise be invading to Hungary and would take away the rights of the Jewish community. The pattern is very similar, but the group of the population which is allegedly protected by the government is rather the Jewish community. Nevertheless, there are anti-Semitic campaigns linked to the governing party as well. So it's a two-sided sword, so to say. But from a very cynical point of view, you can observe this, that the Jewish community is kind of used in this play for a political purpose. So I would say the pattern is there, but not with regards to the LGBT community. In fact, if I think of how leading parties in Hungary, including the governing majority, the government majority is dealing with LGBT people recently, it's rather a form of othering. It's rather in a form of saying that we, the government, are the Hungarian nation, and the LGBT community is not the part of it. So there is an increasing tendency of kind of excluding the LGBT community from the Hungarian nation. The very recent step towards this is a series of constitutional amendments that would, at the level of the constitution, kind of declare transphobic and homophobic messages in a form of the highest legal regulations, which is very worrying.
And with which argument is the Hungarian government trying to exclude the LGBT communities by claiming that they don't embrace or that they don't fit into the family value system?
So look, the recent constitutional amendment reads as follows: the mother is female, the father is male. And this is a provision that should be put into the constitution, according to the governing majority in the parliament. Obviously, there is a narration against rainbow families or LGBTQ people who want to adopt children or raise their children, but there is many more. Recently, a couple of months ago, the parliament adopted changes that bans legal gender recognition for transgender people, which is also a serious problem in the form of an exclusion. And the argument here is that gay or lesbian couples who want to marry, they are threatening the traditional Hungarian marriage, and I quote the Prime Minister here, that existed for over 1,000 years, and now there are these LGBTQ couples who are threatening our Hungarian values that have been there for forever. So we as a government, we have to protect them. Oftentimes it's even more serious than that. And I would say probably Eastern European queer communities would experience a different type of homophobia than those in Western Europe, or at least France, or the white populations in Western Europe, in the Netherlands and France. Whereby in Hungary sometimes there is a distinction from leading parties that saying that there are good queers and bad queers. The good queers are the ones who are in their homes staying silent. They could be tolerated by the majority, and there are the so-called bad queers who are fighting for political purposes, recognition and acceptance in society, and that is something that the governing majority cannot really stand. And this oftentimes results in portraying these bad queers as those undermining national interest, serving foreign values, oftentimes even called as terrorists, undermining state security. So they are definitely the enemy of the state.
There's another film which we screen in our festival, which is called the March for Dignity, which is happening in Tbilisi, Georgia, and it's actually documenting the first Pride Parade in Tbilisi. And there's a lot of people, bystanders in the street, and they are asked for comments about this Pride Parade. And then a common argument actually is from bystanders was, it's okay if people are queer or LGBT in their homes, but don't show it in the public domain. And what you documented, Hakim, with the film is especially an initiative of these young people claiming their position in public domain by organizing this Pride Parade in the underprivileged neighborhood outside of Paris. How did you actually get in touch with these protagonists, and how did you get access to these to them to follow them for your film?
Actually, I had produced a short film, a fiction that was already around the question of being queer in the northern suburbs of Paris. And my friend who was director of that movie short actually lives in Saint-Denis. And he was an activist in that organization that we followed. And as probably David knows, life in an organization is sometimes really hard, and there's ego and disagreements and fights. And so at first, my friend Simon was my way in this group of young people. And actually the deal that we had set was that I would follow him plus the others through the organization of this march. But then after a few weeks of filming, he actually left the group. And so we ended up with these 4 people that we didn't really know that much, that we were discovering as we were filming. And so we sat down with them and we asked them, do you still accept us? Do you still accept that we will follow you, that we will come to your bedroom and at your parents' apartment and follow what you do every day? And actually, I think that they're so young. They were 20 when we filmed it, and now they are almost 22. And now when we screen the movie and we try to have them as much as possible, they have already changed actually so much within these 2 years. And also thanks to organizing this Pride, they are now, I'd say, like louder than ever. But I think that they were really shy. They were kind of scared of us, also because for us, also the bad image of their neighborhoods is due to how the press has shown the neighborhoods for years, for decades, how also documentaries have portrayed the migrant communities in France. And so when we showed up, they didn't really know who we were, and they were kind of scared of the way we would edit the movie, of what we would also find out there, that maybe we would see some violence that they didn't want us to see. But to be quite honest, a lot of people tell us that there is no violence in our documentary, and that it seemed quite easy for them to organize this Pride, this march. And actually, it was the case. We didn't hide any argument or any really violent situation from the viewer. We really showed it the way we perceived it and the way we lived it with them. And also my co-director and I, it was just like the 2 of us with this tiny camera that we bought that was like on sale. So we were not representing much more than ourselves, because I think that if we had showed up with, for instance, a TV channel backing our project, I think that they would have been really scared, saying, okay, you come from this TV channel, this is the TV channel that has showed that documentary that damaged so much our image. So we were just, the 2 of us, and they were really close to us. They were 20, I was 26 when we shot, so there's also this age difference. We were kind of close, actually, and we spent a lot of time laughing with them, having drinks with them. We didn't want to do it too much because we also wanted to keep some sort of distance and to be able not to create a documentary that would be some sort of commercial for them. We also wanted to have our own balance. But yeah, it took time, and we were kind of afraid of the way they would perceive the documentary, because a documentary is 70 minutes and they spent a year of their lives doing it 24/7. So obviously there are moments that for them were really important because they cared a lot about specific moments that we didn't really perceive. And the other way around, sometimes we kept some really random and normal scenes, daily moments. But for them, it was important to keep them because it would also show that it's not just a group of random people who did this Pride. It's also because they are really close friends and that they really do love each other. And so we wanted to show this friendship and the way they tease each other and the way they laugh with each other. And sometimes they were surprised to see those like daily life moments. But for us, the main thing was that we wanted them to be true to them. And for now, they say that that's how they feel. So we're happy with that. What else can I say? Yeah, that's it.
You depicted the protagonist in a very joyous way. And when I watched the film, and I watched it several times actually, I was wondering how was the whole process for them organizing this parade? Because they must have faced also difficulties or struggles or obstacles. But in the film, it was quite, they seem to have a lot of fun also, actually.
Yeah, they actually had a lot of fun doing it. Again, I think because they're 20 and they're really good friends. So I think that it was easy for them. And it's also because it was the first. So they didn't really have a lot of pressure because they didn't really know what to expect. For instance, they spent the last 12 months organizing the second one, and it was so much more pressure. Many more people joined the group. Now they have funding problems too. So I think that the second one was much more difficult because now people know that they exist. They know that they are here, and they know that they are fighting for this question in Saint-Denis. So, for instance, when we showed the movie, most of the times the associations inviting us to screen the movie in other parts of France are organizations that would also organize the local prides. And they always asked us questions like, but for the slogan, how to say that? Slogan of the march, it only took them like half an hour, and it was like the day right before the march. That's impossible. It takes us months, and we have like 10 meetings, and we have a Google Doc and a doodle, and we're like, no, they just did it for half an hour. But this year it was much more difficult. So the second pride for them is harder. They really took it as a group project, really a group project. And for them, they were sure that they would do this pride, even if they had been 4 in the end, or 10 or 20, they would have been happy, actually, I think. Because for them, what was really important was also to show that they could do it without any violence. I think they were really scared of violence on the D-Day, that people would show up, try to beat them up or whatever, or what we think is the worst that can happen there. They didn't want this documentary and their march to be another example of how brutal and violent sometimes these also places can be and are pictured as. And I think that they were so relieved to show that, yes, it's possible to do it, and it's possible to do it without any sort of violence.
Thank you. The first questions came in, and before I'll continue with these questions, I have a question for Dino. We've known each other for quite a while now, and in Amsterdam there have always also been like-minded initiatives with the Moroccan boat and the Turkish boat in the Amsterdam Canal Parade. Obviously different context and different setting than what Hakim depicted in the film La Première Marche. But I wanted to know from your side, do you think that this kind of initiatives like what we saw in the film, or the ones which I mentioned in Amsterdam, do they actually help the cause? Is it counterproductive, or what do you think?
That's a difficult question, and I expressed once years before that, you know, participating in the mainstream pride events as migrant communities, you know, it can be good for visibility. It can be good for showing that, you know, there is some organizing within people that are not white. And not belonging to certain circles that have easy access to all these resources. At the same time, not so much about the initiatives themselves, but the way how they were framed in the media, that was more problematic for me than their participation in the mainstream pride. It was framed as an exception, as, you know, once again, in premiere, while different, you know, initiatives came before, and there were different versions of this Orientalist idea of the other also being part of the gay community. But the way how it was framed, I think that bothered me a lot. Like this whole erasure of one's history is part of that, you know, discourse that we are talking about. You tend to forget, at least in the media or in the public discourses, you tend to forget all these people that went before you, that we actually don't acknowledge, that we don't remember. We kind of pretend like we do, start all over again. even some initiatives that were critical of the Pride, like a project or a group called Reclaim Our Pride. I also criticize that because for me, it's not enough that somebody is against mainstreaming the Pride, against commercializing Pride, against the capitalist neoliberal notions of the Pride. I think it's much more interesting to look at how self-organizing can be so autonomous that, like we saw it in Hakim's movie, the people themselves can decide how they want to do it, that they decide the terms on which they express themselves. But I think we went a little bit too far with certain symbolics, with certain associations, using Pride, even going back to the Pride as an idea that was as it was beginning with a Stonewall. I don't think that nowadays we can escape those frames that we are dealing with, and there are certain associations. So I wouldn't, once again, I wouldn't criticize it too much for what it was from the communities, but more as it is still framed by the media. And I love the fact that we talk about different perspectives. I recognize some of the things that David was talking about from the Balkans, because I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I see those frames popping up all over again. Like the way how, and I suppose that's similar in Hungary, how nationalist right-wing organizations are claiming it to be part of their identity, national identity, to be heterosexual, that has to be embedded in your tradition. But it's also interesting how some of those self-organizations are also claiming their prides, for example, or their aspiration for gay, the LGBT emancipation as a way of going to Europe. So I hear a lot of activists from Balkan claiming that by doing gay activism, for example, they are showing how they are part of Europe. Also, a little bit of a struggle within Balkan context is when I'm in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, I'm always critical of the local traditional nationalist ethno-religious voices as well. But I'm also critical of how the United States or Brussels are framing the gay emancipation in these countries as a kind of litmus test, as a proof that somebody is closer to us in Brussels than they were. And of course, different dynamics are coming into play when you talk about Bosnia and Kosovo and Albania as obviously Muslim majority countries than, for example, in Croatia and Serbia.
Thank you. There's a question which came in for David. I will read it out loud. Are there any homo-nationalist parties that are in the opposition in Hungary? And then the second question, are there opposition sides being nationalist and also, air quotes, gay friendly? Both for you, David.
Yes. So homo-nationalist parties that are in the opposition, there is one nationalistic party that is in the so-called opposition, but in most of their policies, they are rather supportive to the government, and they are actually more to the far right political angle than the government themselves. So one example, so to that question, the reason would be no, or according to my judgment, no. Just to highlight how this far right nationalist party operates, a couple of weeks ago, a children's book was published with fairy tales that included characters that were marginalized, including Roma, including people living with disability and LGBT people. And one representative, actually an MP of this opposition party, tore down the books of this paper in a public press event and put them in a shredder So basically saying that this is so dangerous to our Hungarian values that this needs to be destroyed and shredded. This sparked a lot of outrage in the Hungarian society, not in the governing party, obviously, but this is the nationalist party. And as for the opposition, I don't see any nationalist and gay-friendly party in the parliament or outside of the parliament. There are parties that are to some extent gay-friendly. Some politicians, they do go to pride marches, but this is also development of recent years. But I wouldn't say that they have a consistent pro-LGBTQ political program. I mean, if you say that whether there are patterns of political parties trying to gain political supporters through supporting the LGBTQ community, I would say there are some signs of that. But because the LGBTQ issue is so unpopular in Hungary, it is not really an issue with which you can really spark a lot of political support in the majority of the society. So if you ask the Hungarian society in a representative survey, and there were examples for that, whether they personally know someone who is out and pride in their families or among their circles of friends or people that they know, depending on the survey, you would receive an answer between 9 and 14%. So that's the share of the Hungarian society that personally knows a member of the LGBTQ community, which means that it is very low. I mean, I don't want to say it as a joke, but as you saw from recent developments in Brussels, coming out has been an issue even for leading politicians who have a lot of power and a system of support for them to come out and have not been able to do so. So I mean, this is a very serious story, obviously, but it's just to highlight how serious the problem is. So my point is, I think to be able to have a homo-nationalistic agenda as a political party, there should at least be some support for the LGBTQ issue or the LGBTQ community in the society that you operate, and this is not yet present in Hungary. And I guess this would be similar to Serbia, Croatia, or Bosnia-Herzegovina, but Dino probably has more experience on that.
Would you reflect on that, Dino?
No, I think David said a lot. I think that, the only thing that we have to, rethink when we talk about homo-nationalism is that obviously that term is also challenging us to think through, nationalist ideologies, but there are so many things at stake. I think we tend to forget how xenophobia, Islamophobia, and racism are interconnected with the questions of gender and sexuality. So some of the people are saying like homo-nationalism, a bigger term or broader term is sexual nationalism, where gender comes into play. And I think, but David might disagree with me, but I think I hear a lot of politicians or some of the public discussions in Eastern Europe. I'm also confused when Hungary is Eastern Europe, but that's obviously that post-socialist framing of these countries. When they speak about migrants and Romas as the threat for their community, for our national identity, they are going to rape our women, and etc., etc. So I think on that level, we can compare homo-nationalism and sexual nationalism as being very present in those countries that see themselves as the protectors. I mean, Viktor Orban is obviously seeing himself as a protector of Europe, being a barrier of these barbarians coming into Europe. He's proud of his anti-immigrant policies, the walls that he set up, etc., 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 which is a rhetoric that we see also in the Balkans and even more southern. So I think, when you look at only at the LGBT rights, you might see a lot of differences because, homophobia is a nationalist treasure of many countries that we are talking about. But at the same time, if you, for example, talk about how our women are being threatened by immigrants, Muslims, Romas, then you hear all these nationalist rhetorics extremely loud and clear.
Yeah. So Hakim, we've been talking for the past 45 minutes about homonationalism related to your film, but when you started the film project, did you actually have in mind that the film, besides being a great film, would also have like this more political kind of dimension? And I think my question is, do you think that art in general and film in specific can also play a role in politics?
Oh, I think they obviously do, because I think they can change people's minds and opinions, and minds and opinions are expressed in the polls. So I think that there's a direct connection to politics. When we started the movie, we didn't know that we would talk in the documentary as much about homonationalism or intersectionality. It was brought up by the people that we follow in the movie, because they are also political science students, and so they are learning these concepts, and they are also living them every day. So this is also something that we loved about them, is that sometimes they would mess up in terms of what concept they were talking about. There's this scene in the documentary where Youssef is talking about homonationalism, and Yanis is like, no, this is pinkwashing. And the other one is like, no, pinkwashing is more like Tel Aviv. And he's like, no. And actually, the conversation followed for like 10 minutes because it was so fresh for them. And since they're 20, they're activists, they wanted a little bit, to show up in front of us and in front of the camera and pretend that they were really aware and that they knew deeply well those concepts. And actually, at some point, we were scared of having all of these concepts in the movie, because we thought we don't want the movie to be accessible only for people who are already aware of all of this. Mm-hmm. We really wanted to also show it to people who are not in this area, in this world. We wanted actually everyone to be able to see it and to understand things and to be engaged with this young population. But then we kept it because that's who they are. That's how they speak. That's what they believe in. And this is also how they perceive the world. They really perceive, and at some point Youssef says it. He says, everything is political with me. Even sex is political with me. So that's how they are. That's how they live. And yeah, honestly, we didn't think that all of these concepts would actually walk us through the movie. We tried to find a balance between the concepts and also a more like some sort of character-driven documentary where there's one character almost who's it's not a character because it's a real person, but Youssef is really the one who drives us through the documentary because and actually I must say that Youssef now identifies as a transgender woman, but when we filmed, Youssef identified as a gay young man. And Youssef was actually the one that encapsulated the whole march like in their own life and story. Because this whole march was for people who came from other countries who are perceived as Muslim migrants who live in the suburbs, who don't have a really big income and who try to live the life, and they try to combine two things that are in themselves, which are being Muslim and being queer. And Youssef says that also the danger of homonationalism is that it tells people that they cannot be queer and Muslim at the same time, that it's impossible, that you have to choose. Either you're queer and then you have to forget your past life. You have to forget your parents, your religion, your beliefs, you forget about it. Or you stay in the religion and then you try to fight who you really are, somehow. And in the film, he's like, no, I'm both, and I will be both forever, and I don't care if people don't agree, this is who I am. And I think that the danger of these politicians who try to show the migrant communities as homophobic is that they don't just actually put people against each other, but they also create drifts within some people who are actually migrant and queer at the same time. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. That's really insightful. There's another question, and it's not addressed to someone in specific. So I will read it out loud, and whoever feels comfortable can answer the question. What can we say to people who are saying we are glamorizing anti-gay violence / hate within our communities? Is there someone who feels like...
I suppose this person, I mean, according to the name, I'm supposing that that person is talking about migrant / Muslim / whatever communities. So if that person is still out there, please just clarify a little bit.
Okay, please rephrase the question. I will continue to the next question. Do you think the strategies like homonationalism or even mainstream LGBT+ struggle in Europe monopolize queer struggles, history, and identities? And then following up, by constructing a purely Western history and image of the queer struggle? I think that would be a question for Dino.
Yeah, I mean, the rest can also answer it, but I think this is completely what it's at stake with this kind of discourses. As I said, there is an extreme erasure of people of color, queer people of color, activists that are almost as active as the whole movement. But luckily, we have more and more evidences and documents that, for example, people that identified as queer Muslims were there from the beginning, like literally from the beginning of 20th century, with the first gay organizing in Germany. So, the thing is that we also often tend to look at it through, Germany happened, Stonewall happened, West European and the Northern American context happened. That's the beacon of the gay emancipation. So I think we have to turn those narratives and to show how these narratives are extremely dangerous narratives that we inherited from the colonial times. And we are still struggling with that, because queerness, either if it's about gender or sexuality, existed in all societies, and in particular in Muslim societies across the world. There is a great history of people, of gender non-conforming people and people that are not fitting into heteronormative narratives. But somehow we tend to erase that, ignore that. Even their own sources, I'm talking about Orientalist writings about the Muslim East, they even tend to ignore their own resources or sources that are talking about this extremely sexually over-sexualized Muslim East, and somehow we became the Puritans and anti-gay. So the West has to figure out what they really think about, especially the Muslim other.
Hakim or David, you want to reflect on this question?
Yeah, just no, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I wanted to reflect on what Dino just said, because this is also something that Youssef again really believes in the documentary, is that in the countries, for instance, in the Arabic world, they were queer communities that were existing and that were somehow also really accepted and celebrated. And through colonization, these communities were shut down. And so now these countries are perceived as homophobic but without really going back in history and trying to understand what happened actually in those countries. And so we are now inheriting somehow some sort of history that we don't really make the effort to understand. And personally, I was born in Algeria and I grew up there in the 90s. And you had, I didn't really see a lot of gay men or lesbian women, but I saw a lot of transgender people. And people would not talk about it a lot, but neighbors would know, families would know, and people would accept it. It was not like official and out and loud, but people were like discreetly saying, yeah, I know, but you know, that's my neighbor and it's all good. So there's, yeah, it's really weird how it's perceived here and how it's perceived like on the other side of the sea.
So two very brief points, if I may. Can I add that, Chris?
Sure.
Yeah. So one point on Hungary's Roma population, that is around 5 or 6% of the entire population. That's an ethnic minority in Hungary, and I think, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of the Roma queer community in Hungary, obviously, but these are just my observations. I think if you want to capture some patterns of homonationalism in Hungary, that's even within the mainstream LGBTQ community against the Roma members of the community in the form of trying to portray Roma people as a threat to the mainstream non-Roma community, and that's a huge issue. So anti-Roma sentiments and racism within the LGBTQ community in Hungary, I think that is something that could be captured. And one sign is that it took 9 years for the biggest queer paper, the Queer magazine in Hungary, to feature Roma queer people in an article, and this happened only very recently, which I think is a welcome step, but which took a long time to get there. This is one point. And another one I would like to make is Viktor Orbán's fight with the European institutions, and this which comes very visible into most of the countries that we come from in Europe, in form of the rule of law debate and other debates between the government of Hungary and oftentimes the Polish government towards institutions in the European Union as well. And unfortunately, it seems increasingly to me that the LGBT communities of these countries are actually victims of this fight, because the anti-LGBTQ sentiments could be used in the narrations to fuel the own Hungarian, Polish, or whichever population in the fight against the EU institutions. And I think EU institutions themselves are failing very much to respond to this. And I'm not saying that the Hungarian society itself is ready to respond well to this, but this is just an observation and a phenomena that I think we have to bear in mind.
Thank you very much. It wasn't a short comment, though. Thanks a lot. Another question came in, and I'm afraid that will be the final question. And I look to my colleague. Yeah, I think this is the final question, unless another question will come in soon. And yeah, and it also depends on the duration of your answer, but I will read it out loud. Could the false exploitation of homonationalism on a long term have a positive effect on the acceptance of homosexuals, between brackets, because it starts off from the feeling that homosexuality is okay? And then the same person actually has an additional question, and ultimately maybe even have a positive effect on homosexual migrants as a side effect. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting, and I think this might look as one of the side effects, but it's not. It's taking too long to have these side effects. We also see, you know, like 40 years of, let's say, homo-nationalist discourses in the Netherlands didn't really help the queer migrant communities to win their place at you know, those big tables that we are talking about. The major issue with the acceptance of homosexuality is the conditionality of that acceptance. So when Jasbir Puar, who coined the term homonationalism, she stretches the argument of homonormativity, which represent the neoliberal sexual politics. So that means that only certain parts or certain people that call themselves homosexuals are accepted. So there is, not all queer people are accepted in homo-nationalist discourses. The ones that subscribe to the nationalist ideologies, they are more than welcome. The others that are critical, that are talking about racism, Islamophobia, about multiple discrimination, as we saw in Hakim's video, they are ultimately still the other, maybe less dangerous, but still the one that can be problematic, the potential of being the problematic one.
Do you have anything to add, Hakim? Or do you have a different?
Just, yeah, a quick thing is that even now, I think that what we see with homo-nationalism is that it only seems to accept just one part of the LGBTQ community, is that it's most of the time the white gay men. And if you try to ask the same people about transgender people, well, they will be way more at ease to, for instance, defend them and to try to protect them against the threat of migrants. So even, yeah, I'm just reflecting about what Dino just said now. There's the good people who are allowed to be gay and themselves and to be protected by politicians, and those who don't really care. And that's a lot of people in this LGBTQ community.
And David? No comment?
No, I already took a lot of space.
Well, thank you all, Hakim, for allowing us to screen your film. It was a pleasure to have you here
Thank you so
in
much.
our midst. And Dino and David, well, thanks so much for your insightful remarks and comments, and also for the work you're doing. Having said that, I would like to point out that there's 3 more online talks to come. So tomorrow there is a talk on new queer initiatives in Amsterdam. There will be 3 queer organizations and initiatives who will introduce themselves. On Saturday, there is an artist's talk with a Turkish filmmaker, Metin Akdemir and Simone van Saarloos, which will eventually end in a Zoom party with DJs from Amsterdam and Istanbul. And on Sunday, there's a concluding talk on, and there was already an introduction today by Dino and David, actually, but it's on Central and Eastern Europe, and we will discuss 2 films from one from Georgia and one from Chechnya. So thank you all. Also, people who watched from home, thank you so much for being participant in this fruitful conversation. Personally, I enjoyed it very much, and I hope you did too. See you soon.
Thank you very much.